righty, we are live now. I'm Stephen Davis, and I'm here to join this community conversation on race that we've had. This is the final discussion on it, and not final altogether, but it'll be the final one in the series that we have. And I want to thank everybody, all the rest of my colleagues and all the folks that came before me to share all their discussions, and all the people involved in all the discussions. Some very rich discussions and questions, and there was a lot of great research. Of course, everyone before me worked and gave some great doctoral things. I'm in a doctoral program, and it's just great to be on here, but I'm not going to discuss a whole lot about research, but about men of color in general. And I wanted to just let everybody know, just for a few years ago, I've always had this research interest, but the research interest came to me in a class that I actually worked and taught in, Master's in Social Work class, taught by Dr. Gia Apostle, who is one of our panelists here, and she has encouraged me to continue to do research on this, and I will continue to do it. Also serving as panelists will be Mr. William Turner from the Mount Holly School District, assistant principal, graduate of Stockton, also member of the Sports Hall of Fame, outstanding student athlete, and also doing great things in his community. And also Bright Waite, who is a recent graduate. Bright Waite working for the National Institute of Health. And we thank Bright. And Bright also was one of our Sankofa students, and also a student whom was involved with the administration of Sankofa in his advisory capacity as well. But let's get right to this. Men of color and challenges and strategies and responsibilities. First, I wanted to just make sure that folks knew, as we go to this first slide, that the discussion about men of color continues to be a long one. As you'll see in this very first slide, and we'll talk about just individuals of color and educational attainment. More than 50 years worth of history is involved with educational attainment and the educational gap. James Coleman in 1967 spoke about the educational gap. You'll see this starts in 1964, but right around that time, they talked about the educational gaps. And as you see, for about a 50-year period, they still exist all the way through, and all the different ethnicities all together. And those are the things that continue to be issues. We continue to have issues with educational opportunities, lack of educational resources, and all the other things that you see with the government's involvement with financial aid. As a matter of fact, there is a great contingent of financial aid. The question will be, how will financial aid help us close those particular gaps? And the biggie, the closing in academic performance. So it's a 50-year history of things that need to be discussed when we talk about overall the educational gap that we have. Now we have our graduation rate table. We want to talk about this in the 6-year graduation completion, really from the first institution, full-time degree, and race and ethnicity. And you will see, and we're starting off with the 2010 cohort, some more of the disparities to talk about when we start to talk about gender. And you'll see when we start speaking of men of color, especially with African-American males, very low graduation rate of 34%. And for females, 44%, probably one of the bigger gaps when we speak about gender. But African-American males continues to have the lowest graduation rate across the board amongst history as well. But focusing on this cohort, and again, I talked about 1964 in terms of the educational gap. This educational gap is alive and well with this particular cohort. We also have, we start taking a look at what are some of the challenges before the academy. Low expectations are big. A lot of our young folks that are going to school that start in K through 12, there's a lot of low expectations. There's not a lot of people talking about what they can be, what their career choices are. We know how big TV is, and we know how big TV sports is. Although during this COVID era, there's not going to be a whole lot to see. This is going to be very interesting in what people do. So we start talking about the concerns of academic preparation because early on, there's not enough talk about that. There's also early on, there's not enough men of color, especially involved with going to pre-college institutes. But then, of course, when we start talking about what we all supposedly do well, I'm a former athlete. Mr. Turner, he's a former athlete, and Mr. Waite is a former athlete as well. You know, we're going to do well, but we had options. But what is going on in this country that is a national thing has been the exploitation of athletes, which is cited here. We start talking about the estimated probability of competing in men's basketball, which Mr. Turner did compete in. So we look at the number of participants were 540,769 students. And we look at the overall high school, the NCAA, is only 3.5% of the individuals who are going to be competing will go on to go to college. And as you see, Division I, Division II, and Division III, even in that particular situation, the odds aren't good. And then when you go over to NCAA, to major pro sports, and that includes overseas, you only have about 1.2% of the people that go to the pros total. And in football, staggering numbers as well, 73,000, as you can see, participants that come from the NCAA. After 1 million people compete in high school, only 7.3 of those million people that participate in football will go on to the NCAA, and we'll have very low participation rates and amount of folks that really make it in their particular sport, all under 3%. And when you go to pro football, it is only 1.6% from NCAA to major pro sports. And as we can see this season, there's no fall sports. So we'll see how things go. So when we start talking about challenges at the academy, there's challenges before it. We talk about what a lot of men of color have to go through. Many of us have to go through what is called identity contingencies and stereotype threats because of the way communities are put together and because of resources and because of this continued gap and low expectations. A lot of young men of color that go to school don't have those particular expectations. Everybody does not have the same family structure. Each educational district does not have the same expectations or anything that has to do with resources that's going to assist anyone in doing well. So when these individuals happen and they get to the academy, they don't expect to do well because they're in the same classroom as many other folks, but they feel like outsiders. They feel like outliers. And there are a number of things they have to overcome that once they get into the classroom, what is it that makes them believe that they're going to do well? What is it that makes them believe that these different threats of a person who may come from a different district that is a low-income district is not going to do well? And well, those things turn into microaggressions in the classroom and faculty relationships with students. You know, many times there are folks that we do want to bring in and we do want them to do well, but we have to make sure we have high expectations, because if you don't have high expectations and you're being insulting to this person or people that aren't doing well in the classroom or you don't expect to do well, then they most likely will not do well. Why? Because there's a lot of things that are going on that does not help individuals get past a lot of these microaggressions on campus. For example, there are many people that get mistaken for student athletes on campus. One student from Ohio State said, you know what, I couldn't get to my class because everybody thought I was a person that scored 3 touchdowns, not the person that was in the engineering classes, you know, or this is national, or what the faculty expect. The faculty a lot of times don't expect certain things from men of color that a lot of the studies and research are the things that I've looked at so far talk about. Then we talk about different issues we have within our growing up, mental health issues, being able to use those particular resources and the importance of it. And as you can see here, they face a whole lot of stigma about mental health and whether mental health will really help their growth and address their issues. But they don't develop a whole lot of trust with individuals because of microaggressions and overcoming identity contingencies. And of course, student attrition and student educational attainment. They're not going to do well and stay in school because they feel that they don't belong, and they don't belong because of many of their issues that they may have that they can't get addressed in mental health, and it may get addressed with their transition. Many of the transition programs that individuals have don't address a lot of things we have, although we do have EOF, we do have our student success services program as well. And then Angela Duckworth talked about the lack of grit. Why is it that individuals don't have the lack of grit? What are the non-cognitive factors as to why individuals that are men of color don't do well in school? Because they're not sure that they belong, so they're not pushing as hard, and they're not able to overcome a lot of these different things that are identity contingencies, microaggressions, and some other mental health and personal things. They turn into a whole lack of grit, and they don't have the lack of grit to finish school. Some may have the lack of grit to finish things in their household, in their neighborhood, in sports, but the lack of grit to finish school comes last because of all those other things and challenges at the academy. So early on, and all this is before I did any research, any strategies that I talked about, and I talked about this in Dr. Apostle's class or Masters of Social Work course, that men of color do not get the same head start as everyone else. We don't have a lot of interest in what it is they're doing beforehand in, as you see here, at least 7th grade. And then who are these men of color? Who are they mentored from? These are some of the strategies. So we need to start them early. We need to let them have mentors that are professionals and in an intergenerational sense. So if an individual is in 7th grade, and we started at least 7th grade, that they would have a mentor who's going into the 12th grade, going into college, and would be able to provide them some assistance. Those individuals going from 11th to 12th grade would then have someone starting or going into college, and then a senior in college would be next after that when we start talking about with the intergenerational change. And then we start talking about individuals who have done well and are more mature in their field, that they can look at that entire chain of people and start to look at what high expectations and all those things can help you overcome. And instead of the lack of grit, develop some grit. And of course, the counseling groups that you have coming up all the way through. We have a lot of people who have guidance counselors, but there's not a lot of counseling groups and other things to address mental health issues from 7th to 12th grade, as well as some getting started in the programs that I did mention. I did run EOF program, and Mr. Turner went through that program as well. Specialized program, TRIO, Summer Bridge, any program that has to do with retention are programs that are going to be some strategies for challenges. Of course, involvement in their community and volunteer activities to give them some more opportunities to look ahead for careers and more grit. And of course, we have to ask ourselves when we speak of analysis of consequences, analysis of consequences are things that will happen if we don't do anything else, okay? As you can see, we speak about what the consequences are if we do nothing else about trying to close that gap for 50 years. There is less career choices if we're not thinking about them doing well and receiving a salary, as you'll see here on one side, and then there's loan indebtedness. So you'll see that starting actually at the bottom with a low educational attainment and what it means for the medium weekly earnings. And then loan indebtedness, which is not in this. There's a lot of individuals who even do graduate from school, but their loan indebtedness is at such a level that they continue to stay in a perpetual situation of low income and a very high debt. And of course, as you see, the unemployment rate continues to increase as well with low educational attainment. So, and continuing the research, that's why I want to continue it, and I'll get to some questions in a second. I can ask the panel. This is what I'm planning to study. I haven't said as much about this because the study has not been approved in many places. However, I'm going to look at the lived experiences of African-American males at 4-year, predominantly white institutions, and the importance of things that are difficult things for students of color and men of color, especially African-American males, to have issues with persisting, okay? So in looking at some of the things that are going on, Terrell Strayhorn mentions a few things that has to do with, of course, getting into college and what that means. And we talked about access to college. We talked about starting early. So if we don't start early, there'll be issues with access to school, availability of support services. People are not putting support services together that have to do with belonging and have to do with an individual that wants to stay in school and develop their own counter spaces. And of course, the close connections with the community that some individuals are able to come in and able to forge, those things are going to be important as well. We mentioned the microaggressions earlier, especially with faculty relationships. We found that there was a real positive outcomes or real positive relationships with students that are staying in school, their ability to persist, and their faculty relationships. And they found that a lot more at HBCUs than PWIs. Then we talk about the development, of course, of first-year programs for African-American males. First-year programs like the Black Male Institute out of CUNY, out of the CUNY system in New York, BMI, where they have a mentor off the bat, and they have a summer program that focuses a lot of issues on pride and staying in school and persistence. And of course, the University of Texas has something as well that also talks about all the things they should do, their awareness and mental health and choices that they make. So there's a lot of other programs, too many to mention here today. And the first theoretical framework that I'm looking at is Terrell Strayhorn's sense of belonging theory. And as you can see, the sense of belonging is in the middle. There's also Maslow's that people are talking about what basic human needs are, universal to all. But this sense of belonging for men of color has a whole different connotation, because when we start talking about what basic human needs are and their transition to individuals, their needs continue to be unique. We need to continue to put some things around folks that come through their transitions to address some of those unique things with low-income students, especially low-income men of color, specifically African-American males. And you'll see another part where it talks about taking on heightened importance in certain contexts and time. So there's certain contexts and times where there's heightened importance that PWIs, they have to do a better job of bringing in African-American male students. In fact, along with this theory, there's also an ethical part that individuals do this as well, because if we're going to recruit, provide access, and provide a space for individuals of color, part of what I talked about, I do thank Dr. John Gray, for his ethics class, because he gave me the opportunity to speak about the ethical part of us continuing to not address this educational gap that is going on for more than 50 years. There's an ethical part of it, and there should be increased accountability, which I believe could be coming up next. So when we start talking about recommendations, as our, everything moves on and we get to get some discussions, there are some recommendations here. I won't talk about them all. One of the biggest things I think is, as I look through all these different recommendations, the professional development part, looking at strategies to meet the emerging needs of African-American men. Many of our books that we look at in sociology, many of the courses that I've taught, many of the things that are involved with African-American men and their struggles with being retained in school, retained in education, and all the way through college, all those things are in Chapter 8 of our books. I just don't understand why more things aren't in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and why this is not truly at the forefront. And pouring in more things like our programs for men of color, Sankofa program that Mr. Waif was in for years, and also taking a look, of course, and I say at some point, dedicating a position for men of color that has to do with persistence and success. So here are some questions, and I'd actually like to start with the panel, and we'll go to the audience in a little bit for some questions, but I'd like to start with these particular questions, and I'd like to start with Mr. Turner on the first question that we have. Mr. Turner, and everybody else can answer as well, but let's start with Will Turner. In the K through 12 sector, what are the factors that improve academic preparation and early college success for African-American males? You've taught fourth grade, you've done a number of things. What do you say to that?
I think you hit on some of the factors as you were going over your presentation. I think looking at some of the reading scores and making sure African-American males in particular are on the right track for reading. There's research and documentation on the pipeline for education, checking out if the reading scores for African American males are up or down with how they're building more prisons. I think dealing with other factors, societal factors, dealing with poverty, the early success, EOF, being in the EOF program, I think that was a huge factor. Having programs that can help African American males navigate some of the challenges that you've already addressed and highlighted, I think are huge and instrumental in helping in the preparation for early college success.
Awesome. Dr. Apostle, any comments on that?
I think she's muted.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Apostle, we need you to unmute.
There's a pipeline that's going on between elementary to high school and high school to college that we must understand. And the burden is not for the African Americans to get their acts together. The burden is for those actors, for those people that they meet along the way. And mostly, predominantly white, faculty, staff, people with some power and privilege in every space that African Americans enter and have relationship with. So I say that there's so much more education that needs to happen. In fact, I want to hit on the training that must happen to all faculty and staff, and focus on allyship. Focus on establishing relationship. And some of us are not comfortable with that. So we need to have that conversation and really like a training, serious training, so that we are comfortable in establishing relationship with African Americans. And I'm not saying this because we are always on the verge of always helping and helping. In fact, there is a quotation from Lilia Watson. This is the quotation: if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So it is about collaboration. And this has to happen not as a burden for a youth to think about it some more, but for us people who are grown-ups, who are in certain positions, to actually be on their level and find out what makes them tick in terms of establishing that relationship, so that's going to be uplifted. All of us will be uplifted from that stage.
Thank you. And we have Bright Waite, who, by the way, transferred here as a new student and is doing very well. Bright, what do you say about in the K through 12 sector? What are the factors that improve early preparation, or things that you've learned? And I know you speak to certain groups. What have you learned about that?
Yeah, I like what Dr. Apostle said a lot. I think that collaboration in the higher sectors among the adults and people who have been through the system is very important. But I think particularly what you mentioned with the intergenerational mentoring is something that I've seen have a great effect for a large amount of people, just because being in touch with people that look like you, that have gone through similar cycles, it helps you know that it's possible for you, and they give you advice that you might not have otherwise. I think it helped me see myself being able to go through different steps in life, and I think that if each generation is kind of helping the next, then everybody is learning something, and we're all getting better in that regard. So I think that's one thing that definitely can make a big difference moving forward. Great.
So let's move on to the next question. So what are the strategies? And this is, I think Dr. Apostle alluded to this, so I can start off with you, Dr. Apostle, on this. What strategies should be considered for African-American males used for establishing psychological comfort en route to early academic success and engagement? There's a psychological comfort in the classroom. There's a way to belong. What are some strategies where we can help individuals of color, specifically African-American males, establish that psychological comfort?
I think I'm going back to allyship again, right? Whether the faculty are Black, Brown, Latino, any background, we need to also to think that everybody, all African American youth or young adults have stories, and we need to understand those stories. We all have stories, right? I'm an immigrant, and any person that comes to my class, has stories, and regardless of their race. But I want to say that predominantly African Americans, some African Americans are really starting not from zero, but below zero. In other words, there have been many many experiences that some African American youths have already experienced, even entering before entering college. So that needs to be unpacked. That needs to be understood from the perspective of faculty and staff, and to make sure that they are listened to. We unpack those challenges that they have, and just be an ally. Just be much more attentive to their stories and listen and help. And if there are networking systems that they must reach out to, provide that. And also provide those services that are needed for them to be able to become successful while they are in college.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Bright, why don't we go to you and then we'll go to Will. So Bright, what are you thinking in terms of you transferred? You transferred from Atlantic Cape? I couldn't remember where you transferred. No, you
transferred from William Patterson, so it's a bit up north. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the reason. So tell us about establishing psychological comfort. What was it that got you comfortable? Let's talk about Stockton. You got here. What made you comfortable with Stockton? You got involved. You did well in school. You're looking at med school. This is definitely a harbinger for that. Tell us why.
Yeah, I'd say to understand that, I'd have to go back to high school. I think when I was leaving high school, I didn't have much confidence in my academic abilities, and that kind of transferred into my first couple of years of college when I was at William Patterson. I don't think I did as well as I could have, simply because I kind of believed, and I think that touches on the psychological aspect, is that I just thought I couldn't do well. So when I transferred to Stockton, I actually took a course called Black Men in America, and one of my mentors, Dr. Johnson, did a great job of making us all feel involved and teaching us about the issues. And then in that same regard, we got to teach men that were coming up in high school and mentor them. So I think that disconnecting from some of these beliefs and some of these stigmas that are in the community, whether it's regarding psychological health or regarding whether or not you're competent, I think you have to disconnect and just try and give it your 100% ability. And I couldn't have been able to do that without the mentors and without faculty that were supportive and without the Sankofa system and all the other people that look like me that were all striving for the same thing. It made me feel like I could do it myself. And I think that's something that definitely played a factor in my story.
Awesome. Will Turner.
Yes, and I just want to add on to what they both have said and what Dr. Apostle has also said with allyship, and looking at some of Carol Dweck's work with growth mindset, starting from the foundation that all students can learn. That it's this growth mindset that no matter who you are, no matter what race you are, what socioeconomic status you come from, all students can learn. And coming to Stockton, and being in the EOF program, I was around people like that who believed in me, who believed that, hey, no matter where you come from, you can still learn. And it wasn't just from African-American professors, but also white professors also who had this foundational view. And now we're seeing a big push for social emotional learning, which is now trying to address some of those issues in underprivileged individuals. But I think that was huge for me. I can remember being at Stockton the end of my freshman year and just not feeling like I belonged. And then that's when the director of the program came and picked me up, gave me a ride home. But it was through building those relationships and through those allyships that I felt like I belonged, and I ended up having a great career at Stockton. So I think that is, very important as well.
Mm-hmm. So as we move on, outstanding. So what strategies can be implemented to give the African-American males in their freshman year, in their first year as transfers? What are different strategies we can give them to want to be retained? I mean, what are some of the things that if you knew something now or you got a chance to put something in, what is it that helps give them a chance at it the freshman year? Why don't we start with, we'll start with Bright on that one.
Yeah,
Or transfer. Are you transferred from Willie P? So who you got?
I think that that first, that period before that first semester when you're starting somewhere new is very critical. I think that they allowed me to take classes that I just was interested in. It wasn't about pursuing any program. So that first semester I took courses that were completely unrelated to what I'm doing now, but I felt like I was just learning how to learn and enjoying the process of learning and then being connected again, like I've been saying, with faculty and with programs that, made me feel like I could do whatever I wanted to do. And that little bit of belief, it segued into me pursuing programs where I might have been the only African American in the room, but knowing that I had that support back with Sankofa and with faculty mentors, it really helped because I was somebody that my parents had never been to college, so I didn't have anybody to guide me in that respect. So having, mentors that I've seen have gone through and got their PhD or pursuing other things, it helped. And even when I had questions, they were always there to help me define what I wanted to do and, the steps that I need to take to get there. So I think just to focus on building those kind of relationships before they enter the classroom, and then encouraging students to learn for the sake of learning. And once they learn how to learn and find out what they're excited about learning, I think a lot of good things will fall in line from there.
Great. And Dr. Apostle?
Well, because I am in the classroom as a faculty, I pay attention to the inequalities even before. I'm not saying I'm presuming, certain things, but it is good to understand that dynamic. Like, where are the students, each student coming from, but in particular, African-American students in a predominantly white institution. That's a lot. That's burdensome. And I want to say too that I'm an advisor to the Filipino group here, Filipino students. So by them seeing me, it becomes a comfort for them. So I will not mind if I tell a student to perhaps seek some help, or I get a faculty. I know it's a little burdensome, but another faculty member who can mostly understand certain things that I probably don't. And I'm trying to be humble on that one. I don't know everything, right? But still, to have that collaborative approach where we pay attention to the needs, specific needs of our students that need help. It's really important in our discussion today.
Okay. And Will, you were talking about anyone can learn. How do you put somebody in a situation where they want to learn? I mean, and again, what can be implemented if you were fortunate enough to go through EOF. People who may not be fortunate enough to go through EOF or transition programs, I mean, what are some strategies that we can do to bring folks in? I know you watch people do well, or you saw some people not graduate. I mean, what strategies can be implemented is going to give them can be given in their freshman year, or some of the people that you play basketball with that may have transferred. What are some of the strategies that maybe that help those individuals? And then maybe what would you do now, knowing what you know now?
I think adding strategies of support. We had things like morning exercise. We had things, other activities that helped students bond together. You know, we had people bonding from, if you are from Newark, New Jersey, whether you're from Vineland, whether, different parts of New Jersey, things that help you belong. We had courses that we took as freshmen that mainly help develop your voice. You talked about a lot of microaggressions that coming through the K through 12, you're inundated with those microaggressions, and now you're at college and you're trying to figure out where is it that you belong. But I believe we had classes, I remember from Mom Pam, who had classes on just finding your voice,
Sorry,
creative writing.
tell everybody who Mom Pam is.
Oh, that's Pamela Cross.
Okay.
So, and I think things of that nature, you know, getting a person comfortable with themselves, that you belong in college, you can do well, you can make it. I think that was extremely important for just setting a foundation for beginning a four-year degree in college.
Now, of course, the last question, then we'll try to go to see if we have our folks that are in the audience and there, all the other people involved. Please talk about any strategies or anything that will assist I mean, this big stigma, African-American males in receiving mental health services. I'll be honest with you, you know, I wasn't big on it when I was coming up. You know, my family pretty much said, you're not normal if you do some of those things. That's how we started off. We didn't understand that it was going to be helpful. Bright, you went to a few places. You said you went to William Patterson, you went to Stockton, and you're from Egg Harbor Township. So, and your family is from somewhere else. I mean, you know. So, could you talk about, you know, what are some strategies to get folks there to get some mental health services? Because you face challenges like everyone else, but the research keeps saying we won't be involved, we won't do it.
Yeah. I think, there's definitely a large stigma, and people look at you differently if you go and receive those services. But I think that it's obviously very helpful to be able to voice those opinions, and members of different racial communities do it. So I don't see why it shouldn't be an issue in our community. I think that if there were people that, honestly, speaking from my perspective, if there were people that look like me that I were able to talk to, like a Black psychologist, I think I'd be more or less reluctant to open up. So I'd go there more readily. And I think that it should just be more available and more accessible. I think that I don't even know where to start if I wanted to reach out to go get mental services right now. And that's that hurdle alone could drive a lot of African-American students away. So I think accessibility and then, you know, representation are two things that I would address if I was tackling that.
Okay, Mr. Turner, how about you? How about yourself? I mean, now you had a gentleman that looked like you. Anybody that was here, you had Mr. Vincent Jenkins that was here. You know, he was here and he was important. He wasn't just a counselor, though, was he? I mean, tell me about though how you felt about that then and how you felt about that now, and how do you? Yeah. So how do we get these young men to build the trust that Bright's talking about? Is it just somebody that looks like you, or is it somebody that can relate to you? Is the approach the wrong thing? They talk about storytelling. I think Dr. Apostle talked about it. So tell me what you think about mental health strategies.
First, I'm trying to get over these feelings that Bright is bringing upon me because I like what he said, but the whole William Patterson background is bringing up a sour taste in my mouth as far as the playoffs. But I think, you know, going back to Vince Jenkins, I think going back to my freshman year, seeing in total transparency issues that I had in my family background that arise, which sent me into Vince Jenkins' office. And I think being able to relate to him, I think that was definitely a positive and a plus. I wish I probably had access to Vince Jenkins before my anger and aggression surfaced and, you know, before I got in trouble. And I think also it's the way that I think we have to package mental health services a different way. You know, I'm dating myself a little bit, but I can remember going to McDonald's to the Big Mac. Now, the Big Mac didn't look that great, but it was in a box that was packaged. And sometimes after I ate the Big Mac, I would keep the box because the box was awesome. But sometimes it's the way that we package these services. And I think if institutions can find a way to package services to individuals differently, I think that would be a huge plus for African American, for people in general with mental health issues.
Awesome. And Dr. Apostle, you've been dealing with people with masters in social work folks.
Yeah, so again, I'm going back to the burden, right? Who has the burden of all this? If it's a young man who cannot even understand his mental health issue, whether it is really truly mental health is another thing, right? So I want to say that the people, the person in the room, the teacher, the preceptor, the adult mentor of this young person, young man, has the burden to make sure that this person is, is fine, right? So it's a matter of something superficial to something more deep. So, for example, if as a faculty you see certain behaviors that are different from the norm, as in frequent absences, not turning in work, just inconsistencies, there are reasons behind it. So the faculty needs to kind of like look into that instead of saying, well, okay, that's done. Everybody's equal. No, we need to make sure that African Americans have that attention and find out what the story is. All of the students, definitely. But I'm in the world of social work, so I know. The point is providing that extra attention, providing that extra question to say, how are you doing? I noticed this. Is there everything okay? I mean, these are small stuff, right? But also can become big. Now, I want to say too that some of our African American adults that are coming into Stockton have some historical trauma, right? Some traumas in the neighborhoods, or, those things that have been given to them by their parents and grandparents and so on. And the attitude of some of the people around them that's away from what they're trying to do in real time. So we need to make sure that we are all allies for that person. I think that's it. Of course, perspective taking, what's the story behind it, and then of course referral to mental health. Depending on what we have talked about, there is of course some referral at some point into the future if there is inconsistency in the behavior that's normal in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And that's very good. Many of the things that we're dealing with, again, is people to change their entire way, as Mr. Turner mentioned, about packaging things. So we want to go to the audience. We don't have a lot of time. We may have time for a few questions, and I wanted to make sure we answer them, that to set up, some more of a conversation and deal with some of these different things. There's so many unique aspects. Our hour's quick. So let's see if we can go out there to find out if anyone has any questions for myself or maybe for the panelists about challenges of men of color.
So Steph, you have a couple of hands raised. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Dr. Rodriguez from Student Transition Programs to go ahead and ask her question or comment.
Dr. Rodriguez.
Hi, Steph. I'm really proud that you pulled it through. So you got. Thank you. I just would like to talk about William Turner. He brought up some good points. You also mentioned it as well, Steph. But introducing grit and growth mindset. So I'm excited that you mentioned that, because we will actually be purchasing T-shirts for Welcome Week with the definition of grit and a statement that says, I will display true grit by working really hard at graduating to graduate from Stockton University. And so it's this idea. So not only are these students dealing with the pressures of all these social factors that become barriers and obstacles for them to graduate, but now we're experiencing the pandemic. And this on top of that is just going to induce the stress. And so we have to be very intentional. And that's why I'm introducing this idea of grit at the early onset during Welcome Week. In addition to that, we are also facilitating a program called Growth Mindset, actually Thriving in College, and they will be doing an intervention on growth mindset, which was introduced by Dr. Christine Ferry, who used to present it during the first year seminars, but now we are introducing it at Welcome Week. And we would just really love to see how this can be weaved in and integrated into the academic year. So hopefully we can continue that through our programs. So I really just made a comment, not really a question. So thank you.
No, thank you. And it's important to know where all this is really coming together. We're looking forward to that. And hopefully my dissertation comes together. Dr. Rodriguez has given me a lot of encouragement on that as well. So thank you. Do we have any more hands?
Yes, you do. You have Arnaldo Cordero Ramon. So I'm allowed.
Another one of my mentors. All right.
All right, Arnaldo, you have the floor. Ask him to unmute. Arnaldo, I need you to unmute yourself if you would like to ask. Okay, there you go.
Good. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
One of the strategies that I've been using in all my classes, whether they be general studies or language classes, is the relevance of the materials and a certain percentage of the materials that they can share with their loved ones, with their family members, or with even close friends or their peers at school, just to get the conversations going with family life, socialization, relevance to where we are, what we're doing at the institution. We mentioned reading and reading strategies. I always worry about what is it that our men and women of color, for whatever background, what is it that they're reading, and how can you get them to share those readings with families? As referring to my own experience growing up, my parents didn't speak English, and they couldn't read. They hardly had, 8th grade education, but they always had an interest in learning we were their sources for learning. So when we say learning how to learn, it's not just an individual engagement process that we're learning to be better. We're learning because we want everyone around us to learn what it is that is necessary to learn and create more of a dynamic and a collaboration, as I've been mentioned often. So that's one strategy that I keep in mind in every single class that I teach. And I want feedback from the students telling me in a short writing sample how it is that they shared a certain essay, a certain reading, a chapter from a book, a language lesson, whatever it takes, so that they can start a conversation with their loved ones, their family members, and even their peers or their dorm mates, whatever. That's my observation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cordero Ramon. We've been involved with a number of programs, and he was involved in our speaker for Sankofa just a few years ago. So I appreciate you, Dr. Cordero Ramon, for sure. And it looks like we have time for one more question, I believe. Are there any other hands up?
There are no other hands at this time.
We have one. Dr. Apostle has a hand
Dr.
up.
Apostle, please unmute yourself, and then you can go ahead and speak.
Dr. Arnaldo, I appreciate what you have just discussed a while ago, and I think being intentional in our teaching about some of the things that we need for everyone to learn. And decolonizing the curriculum is one of those things that we have to do. And it's not just from one perspective, from a diverse perspective. And I really, really like that. On one hand, when I think Dr. Ana Rodriguez had said something about grit and growth and mindset, and I think that's great. But we also have to think of the other side. Is it fitting into the institutional structure? What is that institutional structure made of? That's oppressing, that's keeping us trying to work harder and harder. I think we've seen that somehow in other areas of our lives as minority, as Black and brown people, when we try to work harder and harder. So, but the other side, the other perspective is, what's the institution? Are we trying to fit into the institution that might be oppressive, that might, or a classroom that might be oppressive? So we need to also look at that area. In other words, we have to work hand in hand with the structures, not only local or national, global structure, as well as the motivational, the grit, the motivational factors that individuals have. And I think that's really important to think about. Awesome.
Well, like I said, for me, it's just been a pleasure to just have an opportunity to present and work with this panel, and everybody else in your virtual claps, or however you want to do it. Please give the panel a hand. Just a dynamite panel and a dynamite group of people that I'm part of who I am today from these individuals, for sure. And thank you all for helping me cover some of these subjects that are difficult, but yet we have to do a lot more in all types of PWIs and every place else more in window dressing. You know, our policies need to be more informed, and the way we do things continue to be more informed, and those type of sayings that Dr. Rodriguez spoke about need to be as well. So I thank you all for this opportunity, and I appreciate all your help and assistance. And I'm just so proud to get a chance to work with our Stockton community. We have a lot of work to do. Let's keep going to work. And I thank you very much.
Thank you.